Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine for a moment that your personal history isn't just a story you tell yourself,
Hmm.
but instead it's this vast, secure file system,
Mm.
and it's locked down by, well, by your own current reality, your
The
physiology.
material reality.
Exactly. What if your past isn't some continuous narrative, but a series of, complete memory files just waiting for the right key, or, as our sources today suggest, the right combination of keys?
That is the compelling puzzle we're getting into today.
Huh.
We are doing a deep dive into the work of Jamie Horrocks, PhD, and specifically her analysis of what she calls Gestalt, memory, HRT, and writing from the body.
Right.
And this isn't some, abstract theory. It's a very specific documentation of what happens when these fundamental life conditions change, and suddenly these previously inaccessible files of the past they flood back in.
So our mission here is to really understand why Horrocks insists that her writing, which is, it's incredibly explicit and sensory. It's not memoir. It's not
Yeah.
confession. It's just documentation. We have to sort of step away from memory as a simple story we retrieve and start seeing it as a structural process, one that's entirely dependent on the architecture of right now.
The immediate complexity here is that the source material really resists those conventional containers we try to put things in.
Right.
If you look at the raw documentation, which she shares on her Substack, Sensual Residue, the temptation is just huge to slot it into these familiar categories.
Absolutely. The reader is trained, right? You
Right.
approach this kind of explicit bodily writing and you immediately want to label it, oh, this is memoir.
Or confession.
Confession, or maybe a late life erotic archive.
Yeah.
Some public reckoning with a former self looking for a resolution or arriving at a new identity.
And the writing itself almost encourages that misreading because it refuses to filter itself. The source says it deliberately avoids hiding its pleasures or its ruptures behind metaphor thick enough to make them safe for distance. So readers expect a sequence, a resolution, some self-explanation, but the author is crystal clear on this. She says that container does not fit.
And it's so important that we accept that rejection, because if we try to force this documentation into a conventional narrative box, we completely lose the structural insight it's offering.
Yes.
She is explicitly not telling stories from her past in a conventional sense. This isn't designed to explain her present self or offer some tidy arc of personal growth.
Precisely. She isn't reconstructing a narrative identity. And she's not retrieving these intense, raw memories for instruction or titillation or even for closure for the reader.
So what's the point?
The material exists to document a phenomenon. The moment the system unlocks, the reader keeps asking why. Why share this intimate past? But the documentation is focused solely on the how. How did this specific past suddenly become available to write about now?
And that pivot from the why to the how takes us right to the technical mechanism. What the author is documenting, as she calls it, is the Gestalt system reopening files.
This is the core concept. And when we talk about memory as a Gestalt system, we mean something much more precise than just whole.
Okay.
Gestalt implies that the memory comes back as a fully integrated unit. It's inseparable from the sensory input, the emotional resonance, the spatial context of the original event.
So it's not a fragmented anecdote.
Not at all. It's the full, unedited, system-wide experience. And the core argument is that the system couldn't previously access these integrated files safely. And now, for specific reasons, it can.
So the past wasn't gone. It was just lock. It was placed under lock and key by the body's own internal security system, waiting for the structural conditions of the present to finally align.
The security system basically decided that accessing that whole unprocessed data would have been a drain on vital resources needed for survival.
And the sources are incredibly specific about the keys needed to override this defense system. And it's not just one or two, right? There are 3 interdependent conditions that have to shift at the same time.
That interdependence is the really profound part. The documentation acts as a record of what happens when access is granted by a change in 3 specific areas. The first is a change in safety.
Meaning physical safety.
Yes, the physical environment has to signal a profound and consistent shift away from any active threat.
Okay, that's one. What's the second key?
The second is highly physiological. The files reopen when hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, changes access.
Wow. So this suggests the entire hormonal landscape of the brain and body is acting as a crucial switchboard for memory.
A chemical prerequisite. It's completely structural, and it's tied to the body's ability to manage really intense data.
And the third?
The third key, which often gets, sidelined in purely psychological discussions, but it's central here, is material security.
So like money. Housing.
Exactly. The files reopen when basic material conditions, stable housing, financial security, reduced daily precarity change access. The body-mind infrastructure has to feel fundamentally safe in its physical survival before it allows the full weight of the Gestalt past to return.
You know what stands out to me is the equivalence placed on those three factors. We often separate the chemical state, HRT, from psychological safety.
Hmm.
But putting material security, financial stability right alongside them implies that the memory system sees external threats like poverty and instability as structurally equivalent to internal chemical instability or, active physical danger.
That's the critical insight. The
Yeah.
body is both the archivist and the gatekeeper, and it's deciding what the current infrastructure can actually handle. The documentation is about something, and I'm quoting here, more specific and less legible to conventional narrative frameworks. What happens when access changes?
Right.
If you lack adequate safety or hormonal balance or material security, those dense, sensory, unsettling Gestalt files, they stay locked because the system is still running in survival mode.
It's like memory as a triage system. It suggests that accessing your own complete truth is a kind of luxury afforded by stability.
In a way, yes.
But this brings up a really important question, I think, especially because this is documentation being published publicly on a platform like Substack. If the author insists it's just documentation, not memoir or confession, doesn't the very act of publishing it and sharing it with readers inherently transform it back into a disclosure and therefore a narrative?
That's a powerful challenge, and the answer in the source material is nuanced. The writing, in this context, is described as an act of coherence, not disclosure.
Coherence for whom?
For the self.
Yeah.
The author's internal purpose, the source suggests, is to integrate this raw data into the current self. It's about making sense of the system's new bandwidth. The public sharing, which feels like disclosure to us, the reader, is really just a byproduct of the technical process of writing to achieve coherence.
So it's about mapping newly accessible internal architecture.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's talk about the quality of this memory once those three keys, safety, HRT, and material security, are engaged. What does that Gestalt return actually feel like?
The sources confirm that the memory returns fully integrated. It is highly sensory.
Yep.
It is often erotic, just given the nature of the systems involved. And, very importantly, it is unsettling.
Why unsettling?
Because it hasn't been filtered by time or reflection. It completely bypasses that cognitive process that usually tries to turn intense experiences into tidy, palatable anecdotes.
So it sounds less like recalling a fact and more like
Yes.
being thrown back into the full, unmediated physical and emotional shock of the original event.
Yes. The body remembers, and the writing is the log of that raw physical return.
Wow.
And that requires what the author calls writing without sanitizing the body. The writing has to be explicit because its function is mapping, not mediating. It refuses to make the rupture safe for the reader's distance.
It's about making sense of the system's new ability to process what was basically quarantined data.
It's truly a technical report on the self, a record of the reintegration process.
So what does this all mean for us, for you listening? We've looked at memory today not as a passive, linear story we possess, but as this integrated conditional system, a Gestalt memory, whose accessibility is entirely dependent on profound structural changes in the present.
Guarantees safety, critical hormonal balance, and consistent material security.
Right.
The central idea reinforces that the body is an active, brilliant filter. It archives and gates what we can emotionally and physically withstand. And it really challenges the assumption that we always have complete, unfiltered access to our own past whenever we just choose to reflect.
So the history is there, physically present, but access is absolutely conditional.
Absolutely.
And if we carry that idea forward, that our memory system waits for safety, HRT, and material security before it reopens files that are whole, sensory, erotic, and unsettling, this raises a pretty profound final question for you. If access to the most vital integrated data about your past requires this structural stability, what crucial knowledge about yourself, what fully formed experiences are currently being held back by a lack of one of those three conditions? What parts of your past is your present environment still blocking? Suggesting that a fuller understanding of yourself might sometimes require not just introspection, but fundamental structural change in your physical and material world.